Hi, I'm Kelsey, and I'm currently a student at UW-Milwaukee. This past semester, I took the history of Mexico as one of my history classes, and during it, I learned about slavery in Mexico, which I'd never really thought about occurring before, even though it makes sense since there was slavery all around it in other countries that border it. So, one of the things I learned about was the slavery aspect, but then also one slave in particular. His name was Yanga, and I had never heard of him before, and I don't know why, but this will be the focus of my final project, so I hope you find it educational and also a little bit, I don't want to say provocative, but definitely thought-provoking and kind of questioning, if you will. So to start, we're going to look at Yanga himself. He was an African slave brought over in the slave trade to Mexico. He's rumored to be of the royal family in Gabon, even though we can't really prove it, but that's what he claimed. And he was in the eastern part of Mexico. He was on a sugar plantation, which dominated Mexico as basically sugar because of the climate and location. He became famous around 1570 for leading a revolt with other slaves, where they basically rose up and ran away, so to speak, from their plantation. They established a Maroon community, which is a community of runaway slaves. This is near present-day Veracruz, which is also on the eastern coast of Mexico. And these other runaway slaves helped him to build this community where they were pretty much self-sufficient. They would grow their own crops and stuff like that, but they would also raid neighboring Spanish villages to get what they needed. And they did this for about roughly 30 years, which is pretty long, so they were quite successful on this scale. There were a few skirmishes here and there between the Spanish officials and the slaves, but overall, the runaway slaves were able to maintain a pretty much free lifestyle. Things came to a head in 1609 when the Spanish government decided to put an end to this, and they sent a war party over with a bunch of soldiers to try to stop the Maroon community that was established. So it went back and forth, lots of bloodshed on both sides, but the people following Yanga were able to eventually come out on top, and the Spanish basically just got sick of, a stalemate. So Yanga sent a treaty to the Spanish asking for their own autonomy for their community, as well as they would kind of comply because they would return runaway slaves that were not there for a certain period of years, but they wanted the people who had originally gone away to be able to have their freedom and maintain it and not have to go back to slavery. It went back and forth a lot. The Spanish didn't accept this treaty at first. However, in 1618 they did, and then they established the town, and it was called San Lorenzo de los Negros de Cerralvo. So, pretty successful that Yanga ran away, led this group, and basically got a town established, and that happened in 1630. Not really sure how much longer he lived, don't have a whole lot of documentation on Yanga. There is a statue of him, so we do know he is real, and there's actually a town named after him near Veracruz. It's called Yanga, so it is a place you can go where they still actually do celebrate him revolting against the Spanish and gaining freedom. Not a lot of people know about it, at least in the US, which is my major question as to why. I just find that really strange, especially since the other popular slaves that most of us know about are Nat Turner and Toussaint L'Ouverture. So a little background on both of those men. Nat Turner was an American African slave, and he was born in 1800 in Virginia. He worked in Virginia on a plantation. I think it was a cotton plantation. He became very religious and felt it was his moral obligation, if you will, to rise up and rebel against the white masters. And in 1831, he saw about 80 slaves or so rise up and kill 51 whites. He wasn't really a part of that directly, but he definitely was a sympathizer, and I believe he was even a medic to, watch over those who were injured. Due to his part in this, and he kind of became a little conspirator with it all, he was captured and hanged. So he didn't really get too far, but almost everybody who's taken, general history courses of the U.S. knows about him. And switching gears a little bit to Toussaint Louverture, he was also an African slave, and he was born in Haiti in 1743. During his upbringing, he was fairly educated, learned to read and write. He earned freedom at the age of 33, so which is around 1776. And there was a rebellion that happened around 1791 by other slaves. He wasn't really a part of it, more an onlooker. So wasn't a huge significant player, but definitely notable because he was involved in more and more political things here and there and kind of made a name for himself. And eventually down the road he was able to pretty much take control of Haiti and that half of the island of Hispaniola. When he rose to power, he engineered an all-black government and kind of sent Spanish officials away. I don't really think he killed them. He just kind of gave them incentive to leave, or said, oh, this is going on overseas, you should go here, and then, put someone in their place while they were gone. So pretty crafty, actually. After he did that, he wrote a constitution which made him governor for life and allowed him to pick his successor, which is pretty major for a law to be put into place. During this time, Napoleon Bonaparte was in power, and he really didn't like this. You can imagine why. So he finagled his way over there with some soldiers, not himself, but his soldiers did, and they captured Toussaint Louverture and brought him back to France. They imprisoned him, and he died in 1803. So you could call Louverture pretty successful because of the stature that he was able to amount to, but in the end it kind of was his downfall, and he lost his life for it. So when you look at the three, I think it's pretty clear that Yanga is the most successful, because not only did he just rise to power like Louverture, but he brought about 500 other people salvation as well. So I think it really goes to show that he is definitely a pivotal character, especially since his rebellion happened first in terms of chronology. So he really was the first leader of the first rebellion and established the first free black community. So I think that's pretty important and, should definitely be recognized. But like I said, it's not widely known. And actually, I was really intrigued by this, so much so that I went around asking people that I knew if they had heard of any of the three. They didn't have to know anything about them, just if they had heard their name before. I asked 9 students from my upper level history class on methods and research techniques, and excuse me, all 9 of them had heard of Turner and Louverture, but not Yanga, which I was kind of expecting. And then I also asked 21 primary school teachers that I work with. They teach grades K4 through 4, and a little bit spottier with them, but once again, nobody knew who Yanga was. Actually, the turnout for them, 11 of the 21 knew who Nat Turner was, and only 3 of the 21 knew who Toussaint Louverture was. So overall, Yanga had a big 0 for his end of the chart, which is, I was expecting it, but it's honestly like pretty sad and just almost a little frustrating, if you will, because here we are not including some important history that definitely should be known, especially probably for those who are descended from, African American slaves, or just any Africans in general, or anybody really. I think it's unfortunate, and you can begin to ask why we don't know about this, because in U.S. history classes that I've taken that have talked about slavery, yeah, they do talk about the U.S. mostly, but then they also talk about Haiti or Cuba or even Brazil. I mean, they cover a lot of the Caribbean, but Mexico is completely left out. And when I sat down and just thought about my history education in the past, I've really had no education at all on Mexico. I mean, I really don't even know much about the Mexican Revolution, or even like the Spanish-American War. I don't know anything about, which is still part of American history in terms of U.S. history, I should say. But it really makes me wonder why Mexico is so excluded from Western history. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because it is important, seeing that, Yanga, a character such as himself, was so significant in, slavery and stuff like that, and yet here we don't even know anything about him. So I wish I was able to ask people who are educated in Mexico, but I don't know anybody who grew up in Mexico. So if anybody sees this video, feel free to ask your friends or parents or whoever, especially if they're from Mexico, see if they know who Yanga is, because I don't know if they would or not. But but I really think it should definitely lead us to question our education system and the paradigm that's been set. I know it's tough for teachers to fit a lot of instruction into the school year, because, there's like infinite amount of information out there and only a finite time to teach it in. And I myself will be a teacher in a few years, so I will be facing this very problem. But it makes you question where the line is drawn between what's important and what's not, and what's considered necessary to learn and what's not. So there's different ways to go about this, but as of right now, Yanga will probably remain a mystery character. But I hope whoever watches this definitely feels enlightened and will not forget about Yanga.